The golden sun is setting over the endless sands of Egypt, casting long shadows over ancient ruins. Somewhere beneath those drifting dunes, hidden for centuries in the quiet darkness of a tomb, rests something truly remarkable. It is not just a book, but a gateway, filled with spells, prayers, and mysterious incantations. This is not a story about treasure or lost cities, but about a map for the soul. This is the Book of the Dead. Now, picture yourself stepping softly into those silent burial chambers. The air is heavy with history. On the walls, painted figures seem almost alive. In your hands, you hold a papyrus scroll, its surface covered with strange symbols and illustrations of gods, monsters, and long journeys through the unknown. This scroll is not meant for the living, but for someone about to cross the greatest threshold of all, the journey after death. But what exactly was this Book of the Dead? Was it really a book, or something even stranger? And who was allowed to use its secrets? Was it only for mighty pharaohs and princes? Or could an ordinary person, someone like you or me, hope for its magic on their own final journey? Imagine the hopes and fears of the ancient Egyptians, wondering what would happen to them after their last breath, and clutching this book as their only guide. The truth is, the Book of the Dead was not a single book at all. It was more like a collection of magical recipes, each one designed to help a soul overcome the challenges of the afterlife. Some spells promised protection from demons lurking in the shadows. Others offered simple comforts like a daily loaf of bread or a sip of cool water. There were even instructions to help you speak the right words before the gods and to keep your heart as light as a feather, a necessity for reaching paradise. And here's a little-known secret. Some of these spells were considered so powerful, so risky, that the scribes who wrote them would sometimes add warnings in the margins. They would remind readers to pronounce every word perfectly, because a single mistake could bring unexpected trouble. For the Egyptians, the world beyond death was not just mysterious. It was full of challenges, puzzles, and sometimes dangers. So today, together, we will unroll these ancient scrolls and step into a world where life and death are part of the same great adventure. We will discover the real purpose behind the Book of the Dead and find out what it meant to the people who trusted it with their hopes for eternity. If journeys into the past fascinate you as much as they fascinate me, then you are in the right place. Please remember to give this video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires. Here, the lost worlds of history are never out of reach. Are you ready? Let's begin our journey into the secrets of eternity. Picture this. You're standing in the dusty halls of the Egyptian Museum, gazing at an ancient papyrus scroll covered in hieroglyphs and mysterious illustrations. The guide tells you it's the Book of the Dead, and immediately your mind conjures images of dark magic and forbidden knowledge. But here's the thing that would absolutely blow your mind. This wasn't actually a book at all, and it certainly wasn't about death in the way we might think. Let me take you back to ancient Egypt, where death wasn't seen as an ending, but as the most important journey a person would ever take. Imagine living in a world where everyone believed that when your heart stopped beating, your real adventure was just beginning. That's exactly how the ancient Egyptians saw things, and they weren't about to send their loved ones on this cosmic journey empty-handed. The text we call the Book of the Dead was known to the Egyptians by a completely different name, Pere-em-Heru, which translates to the coming forth by day. Beautiful, isn't it? Instead of focusing on death, they were thinking about awakening into eternal daylight, about emerging victorious from the darkness of the underworld into an endless morning. Now here's where it gets really fascinating. This wasn't some mass-produced manual that everyone got the same copy of. Think of it more like a personalized survival guide, custom-made for each individual's journey through the afterlife. Some scrolls were short and simple, maybe just a few essential spells for basic protection. Others were elaborate masterpieces stretching over 40 feet long, filled with hundreds of spells, detailed maps of the underworld, and intricate illustrations that would make any modern graphic novel jealous. The wealthy could afford what we might call the premium package, scrolls written on the finest papyrus by master scribes, with their name inserted into every spell, custom illustrations showing them meeting the gods, and even personalized advice for challenges they might face based on how they lived their life. Meanwhile, ordinary people had to make do with shorter, more affordable versions, or sometimes just relied on memorizing the most crucial spells and hoping for the best. But here's something that would make any modern safety inspector have a heart attack. Some of these spells came with actual warnings. Imagine opening an ancient scroll and finding a note that essentially said, "Caution. Mispronouncing this incantation may result in vengeful demons." The scribes weren't joking around. They believed that words had real, tangible power, and getting them wrong could turn your helpful spell into a supernatural disaster. Think about what this tells us about how seriously the Egyptians took the afterlife. They weren't just hoping for the best or relying on faith alone. They were preparing like someone getting ready for the most important exam of their existence. Except the consequences of failing weren't just a bad grade, they were eternal oblivion. The spells themselves reveal so much about Egyptian fears and hopes. There were incantations to help you remember your own name after death, because they believed you might forget who you were in the confusion of dying. There were spells to ensure your heart wouldn't testify against you during judgment, others to help you transform into different animals if you needed to escape danger, and even practical ones that guaranteed you'd have food and drink in the afterlife. One of my favorite details is that some spells were basically ancient room service orders for the afterlife. Spell number 201, for example, wasn't about fighting demons or navigating supernatural realms. It was specifically designed to ensure the deceased would receive fresh bread, cool water, and roasted meat every single day for eternity. It's somehow both deeply spiritual and charmingly human at the same time. The creation of these scrolls was an art form in itself. Master scribes would spend weeks or even months carefully writing out each hieroglyph, knowing that a single mistake could doom someone's eternal soul. The pressure must have been incredible. Some scrolls show evidence of corrections, where a scribe realized they'd made an error and tried to fix it, scratching out words and adding new ones in the margins. What's really remarkable is how this tradition evolved over time. The earliest versions, dating back over 4,000 years, were much simpler affairs. But as Egyptian civilization grew more complex, so did their vision of the afterlife, and the Book of the Dead grew along with it. By the time of the New Kingdom, these scrolls had become incredibly sophisticated documents that revealed not just religious beliefs, but social hierarchies, artistic styles, and even economic conditions of ancient Egypt. The fact that these scrolls survived at all is its own kind of miracle, and it tells us something profound about human nature. Here were people thousands of years ago facing the same fundamental questions we still grapple with today. What happens when we die? How do we prepare for the unknown? What does it mean to live a good life? Their answers were different from ours, but the questions themselves remain timelessly, achingly human. Picture this. You're an ancient Egyptian, and death isn't an ending. It's the beginning of the most important journey you'll ever take. But here's the thing that makes your heart race with worry. This journey through the underworld is filled with demons, fire-breathing serpents, and gates guarded by creatures with knives for teeth. How do you prepare for something like that? This is where the Book of the Dead becomes absolutely fascinating. The moment someone died, their family didn't just grieve, they immediately went into action mode. The first priority wasn't even the funeral itself, but making sure their loved one had the right magical tools for what came next. The mummification process we all know about was just the opening act. While the embalmers worked their 70-day magic on the body, scribes were busy creating something even more precious, a personalized guidebook for navigating the afterlife. Think of it as the ultimate travel guide, except instead of recommending restaurants and hotels, it's teaching you how to turn into a falcon to escape a demon, or how to convince a gatekeeper that you're worthy of passing through. What's absolutely mind-blowing is how different these books were depending on who you were in life. If you were wealthy, maybe a high priest or a successful merchant, you could commission a scroll that was literally tailored to your soul. Scribes would include spells specifically chosen for your profession, your personality, even your particular fears about death. These custom scrolls could stretch for 40 feet or more, covered in gorgeous illustrations painted with gold and precious minerals. But here's where it gets really interesting. Not everyone could afford the deluxe version. Middle-class Egyptians often bought what we might call the standard edition, pre-written scrolls where scribes would just fill in your name in the blank spaces. It's almost touching to imagine a scribe carefully writing, "May the gods protect your name here," as they journey through the Duat thousands of times. And the poor? They relied on something even more fascinating, memorized spells passed down through families, or sometimes just a few simple phrases written on scraps of papyrus. There's something beautiful about the idea that even the humblest farmer believed their words had power enough to protect them in death. Now here's a detail that will make you smile. Some of these spells were essentially ancient food delivery orders. Spell number 201, for example, was like placing an eternal catering order with the gods. It guaranteed that every single day in the afterlife, you'd receive fresh bread, cool beer, and roasted ox meat. The Egyptians were practical people. They figured that even in paradise, you'd probably get hungry. The scribes who wrote these books held incredible responsibility. One mispronounced word, one incorrectly drawn hieroglyph, and the spell might backfire spectacularly. Some scrolls actually contain little notes in the margins where scribes wrote warnings to themselves. Be very careful with this spell, or double-check the pronunciation of this god's name. These weren't just copyists. They were magical technicians whose precision could determine someone's eternal fate. The opening of the mouth ceremony was where everything came together. Picture the family gathered around the mummy, with a priest holding special tools, some shaped like fish, others like serpents, touching different parts of the wrapped body while reciting spells from the Book of the Dead. They believe this ritual literally reopened the deceased person's ability to breathe, speak, and eat in the afterlife. Without it, you might arrive in the underworld unable to defend yourself when the gods questioned you. The placement of the scroll itself was an art form. Sometimes it was tucked between the mummy's legs, sometimes wrapped around the arms, and occasionally placed right over the heart. The location mattered because different spells needed to be accessible at different moments of the journey. You wouldn't want the spell for crossing the lake of fire to be wrapped around your ankles when you needed it in your hands. What strikes me most about all these rituals is how they reveal something deeply human: the absolute refusal to let death be the end of caring for someone you love. These weren't just religious ceremonies. They were the ultimate act of devotion. Families would spend everything they had, work for months, and coordinate dozens of specialists, all to give their loved one the best possible chance at eternal happiness. Even more touching is how democratic the whole system was in its own way. Whether you were a pharaoh or a fisherman, everyone got some version of these protective spells. The Egyptians truly believed that with the right preparation, anyone could make it through death's trials and reach the field of reeds, where the sun always shines and the harvest never fails. These funeral preparations weren't somber affairs of quiet grief. They were bustling workshops of hope, with scribes writing, artists painting, priests chanting, and families planning every detail of their loved one's cosmic journey. In a way, death brought out the most creative, caring, and collaborative side of ancient Egyptian society. Are you fascinated by this ancient legacy? Then comment your thoughts, like the video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires for more epic journeys. Picture this. You've just died in ancient Egypt, and suddenly you find yourself standing at the edge of a vast, mysterious realm called the Duat. This isn't the peaceful, cloud-filled heaven that many cultures imagined. No, the Egyptian afterlife was something far more complex and, frankly, terrifying. The ancient Egyptians believed that death was just the beginning of an incredible odyssey. Your soul, or what they called the Ba, would have to navigate through 12 hours of darkness, each one filled with its own unique dangers and challenges. Think of it like the ultimate obstacle course, except the stakes couldn't be higher. Your eternal existence hung in the balance. The journey began the moment the sun set each day, because the Egyptians believed that the dead traveled alongside Ra, the sun god, through the underworld. As Ra's solar boat sailed through the darkness, the deceased would face their first trials. Imagine lakes of fire that you had to cross, serpentine demons with names like he who dances in blood, blocking your path, and gates guarded by creatures that could destroy your soul with a single glance. But here's where it gets really fascinating. The Egyptians didn't just throw their dead into this cosmic gauntlet unprepared. They developed an intricate system of spells and incantations, what we now call the Book of the Dead, to help souls navigate these perils. Some spells would transform you into a hawk so you could fly over dangerous terrain. Others might turn you into a crocodile to swim through treacherous waters, or even a beetle to burrow under obstacles. One particularly clever spell allowed the deceased to become invisible to demons. Another promised that if you recited it correctly, you'd never go hungry in the afterlife. You'd always have bread, beer, and roasted meat at your disposal. The Egyptians thought of everything, even the practical concerns of eternal existence. The most crucial moment in this entire journey was the famous weighing of the heart ceremony. After surviving the perils of the Duat, your soul would finally arrive at the Hall of Two Truths, where Osiris, the Lord of the Dead, presided over the ultimate judgment. Here's what would happen. Your heart, which the Egyptians believed was the seat of your conscience and memories, would be placed on one side of a golden scale. On the other side sat a single feather, the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. But before this weighing could take place, you had to face the 42 negative confessions, standing before 42 different judges, each representing a different sin or moral failing. You had to declare your innocence. "I have not stolen," you would say to one judge. "I have not murdered," to another. "I have not cheated in business dealings," to yet another. Each confession had to be spoken with absolute conviction, because these divine judges could see straight into your soul. Here's something that might surprise you. The Egyptians fully expected most people to fail this test. They knew that no human life was perfect, that everyone had committed some transgression, large or small. That's why they developed spells that would help the deceased navigate even this final challenge. Some spells taught you exactly what to say to each judge. Others provided magical protection against the consequences of past misdeeds. If your heart proved heavier than the feather, weighed down by guilt and wrongdoing, a terrifying creature called Ammit would devour it instantly. Ammit had the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Basically, ancient Egypt's version of the ultimate predator. Having your heart eaten by Ammit meant complete annihilation. Your soul would cease to exist entirely, which to the Egyptians was the most horrifying fate imaginable. But if your heart balanced perfectly with the feather, or proved lighter, something wonderful happened. Osiris would welcome you into the Field of Reeds, the Egyptian version of paradise. This wasn't a place of endless harp music and floating on clouds. Instead, it was an idealized version of Egypt itself, fertile fields stretching to the horizon, the Nile flowing crystal clear, and abundant harvests that never failed. In the Field of Reeds, you could reunite with loved ones who had passed before you. You'd have a house by the river, fields to tend if you wished, and all the beer and bread you could want. Some texts describe the deceased enjoying elaborate feasts with the gods themselves, sharing stories and laughter for all eternity. What makes this entire system so remarkable is how democratic it was, at least in theory. While the wealthy could afford elaborate burial preparations and personalized books of the dead, the basic promise of the afterlife was available to everyone. Even the poorest Egyptian could memorize the essential spells and hope to pass through the trials successfully. The Egyptians spent thousands of years refining and perfecting this vision of the afterlife. They created detailed maps of the Duat, cataloged every demon and challenge a soul might face, and developed hundreds of spells to help the dead overcome each obstacle. It was perhaps the most comprehensive and systematic approach to death and the afterlife that any ancient civilization ever developed. This intricate system reveals something profound about the Egyptian mindset. They refused to accept death as an ending. Instead, they saw it as a transformation, a difficult but ultimately rewarding journey to a better existence. Their entire civilization was built around this fundamental belief that with proper preparation, wisdom, and a little divine help, anyone could achieve immortality. Even today, thousands of years later, there's something deeply moving about their determination to conquer death itself, their refusal to simply disappear into nothingness, and their conviction that love, memory, and consciousness could somehow survive beyond the grave. When you really think about it, the Egyptian Book of the Dead wasn't just about death at all. It was about something much more fundamental: the human struggle to find meaning in the face of the unknown. These ancient scrolls, covered in hieroglyphs and mystical spells, reveal something profound about what it means to be human, regardless of when or where we live. The Egyptians looked at death and refused to accept it as the end of the story. They couldn't bear the thought that all of human experience, the love, the memories, the relationships, the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime, would simply vanish into nothingness. So they created an entire system to ensure that wouldn't happen. They built pyramids that still stand today. They perfected mummification techniques that preserved bodies for thousands of years, and they wrote guidebooks for the soul's journey beyond death. But here's what's really fascinating. When you strip away all the ancient mythology and supernatural elements, the Book of the Dead is essentially about accountability and moral living. Those 42 negative confessions weren't just random rules. They were a comprehensive moral code. Don't steal, don't lie, don't harm others, don't cheat, don't be cruel to animals, don't pollute the water. Sound familiar? These principles form the foundation of virtually every ethical system humans have ever developed. The Egyptians understood something we sometimes forget in our modern world: that actions have consequences, and that how we treat others matters deeply. They believed so strongly in this principle that they made it the centerpiece of their entire afterlife system. Your heart, the symbol of your conscience and your choices, would literally be weighed against truth itself. What's equally remarkable is how the Book of the Dead reveals the Egyptian understanding of preparation and planning. They didn't believe you could just wing it when it came to the afterlife. You needed to study, to prepare, to learn the right words and rituals. Wealthy Egyptians would spend years commissioning their personalized books of the dead, working with scribes to ensure every spell was perfectly copied, every illustration was accurate. This tells us something important about how they viewed life itself. They saw existence as something requiring intention and effort. You couldn't just drift through life expecting everything to work out perfectly in the end. You needed to actively engage with moral questions, to make conscious choices about how to live. Now imagine for a moment what a modern Book of the Dead might look like. What would we want to carry with us into the unknown? Instead of spells to transform into animals, maybe we'd want reminders of the people we loved and the moments that mattered most. Instead of incantations to ward off demons, perhaps we'd choose words of comfort from poets and philosophers who helped us understand life's complexities. Our modern version might include photographs that captured perfect moments of joy, letters from friends that reminded us we were valued, or recordings of laughter from children we cared about. We might want copies of the books that changed our thinking, the music that moved our souls, or the recipes that brought families together around dinner tables. Think about what moral confessions we might make today. I tried to live with kindness. I worked to leave the world a little better than I found it. I listened when others were in pain. I stood up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. I found wonder in ordinary moments. I forgave when forgiveness was hard. The Egyptian Book of the Dead also reveals something touching about human optimism. Despite creating this elaborate system filled with dangers and trials, the Egyptians fundamentally believed that good people would make it through. They had faith that love was stronger than death, that memory could transcend time, and that consciousness was too precious to simply disappear. This optimism is even more remarkable when you consider how harsh life could be in ancient Egypt. People died young from diseases we can easily cure today. Natural disasters could destroy entire communities. Yet they maintained this incredible hope that death wasn't the final word, that somehow, some way, the best parts of being human could continue forever. Perhaps most importantly, The Book of the Dead shows us that every civilization grapples with the same fundamental questions. What happens when we die? How should we live while we're here? What makes a life meaningful? Do our choices really matter? The Egyptians spent 3,000 years developing their answers to these questions, creating one of the most sophisticated and hopeful visions of the afterlife ever imagined. Their legacy reminds us that humans have always been meaning makers, storytellers, hope creators. We've always refused to accept that our brief time on Earth is all there is. Whether we believe in ancient Egyptian afterlife, other religious traditions, or secular forms of immortality through memory and impact, we share this fundamental human drive to transcend our limitations. The Book of the Dead ultimately teaches us that preparing for death is really about preparing for life. When you know that your actions will be weighed against truth, you live more truthfully. When you believe that love and memory can survive beyond death, you invest more deeply in relationships. When you see life as part of a larger journey, every moment becomes more precious. So, what would your personal Book of the Dead contain? What wisdom would you want to carry forward? What truths about love, kindness, and human connection would you inscribe for eternity? The ancient Egyptians believed that asking these questions and living by the answers was the key to conquering death itself. Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires, where the past is never truly lost. In the end, perhaps that's the most important lesson of all, that thinking seriously about death helps us live more fully, and that our deepest human values, love, truth, justice, compassion, are the closest things we have to eternal life.